Welcome to Celluloid Columbia, a podcast dedicated to expanding visual literacy, with your host, August Holt Marquardt.
Sometimes reality is the strangest fantasy of all.
There is nothing more important to the longevity of a film than a confident director. Such a director is one who truly believes that their characters will allow the viewer to sit back in their seat or lean forward in the company of strangers and feel human for a couple hours. Great directors all push for this result through their own unique aesthetic. It's what informs every creative decision when they step past the lens and whisper into their talents here in between takes, provoking the performer just enough so they can get a little closer to the emotions they felt and visualized in their minds for an indefinite period of time. A great director knows no bounds to their position, willfully becomes a tyrant if necessary to preserve their vision, and has a deep and unrelenting need to communicate something to the audience. An idea, a victory, a fear, a sense of a specific time or place, a certain type of relationship, an atmosphere, to each his own. So for this very first episode, in the spirit of bringing a great director to the fore, what better rabbit hole to crawl down than a study of Sam Peckinpah's filmography, a brutish 14 pictures, all torn from Sam and recut to varying degrees, except for one.
One year I remember shooting my third deer. He was at the edge of a bluff, maybe 100 yards off. It was snowing. I was walking. I snuck around a tamarack and shot him in the neck. When I circled around to where he was half hanging over the edge, but still alive. And as I approached him, he watched me with a mixture of fear and resignation, and I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Because I didn't really mean to kill him. I got caught up in the chase. But there was nothing I could do except pull his hindquarters away from the edge and put a bullet through his head to end his suffering. When that was done, I knelt down beside the carcass in the snow to gut it and found myself unable to control my tears. I'd had such an incredible communication with that animal. I'd have done anything to have seen him run again, but when you're really hunting, there's a relationship between a man and what he kills to eat that is absolutely locked. It's hard to explain to people who think that meat comes from their local grocery store, or to those cats who come out and shoot anything that moves for trophies. But I cried for that deer with more anguish than any other time in my life.
So, what you just listened to there was an excerpt from the Sam Peckinpah Papers. That was read by the great Jason Robards, who played Cable Hogue in Sam's 1970 feature, The Ballad of Cable Hogue. And my reasoning for playing that for you on this episode is I think that there is a lot that you can understand about Sam's character and his relationship with violence in his films. He didn't take it lightly. And I think that there was a lot of emotion behind his directorial decision-making when depicting violence on screen. And this is a theme, Peckinpah's third deer. This is a theme that we're going to circle back and return to various times over the course of this Sam Peckinpah series. So Sam Peckinpah was the violent and raving conclusion to John Ford's reign over the Western genre. In many respects, Ford owned the art form, having pioneered the archetypes since the 19-teens under the name Jack Ford, until changing it to John in the year 1924, shortly before the completion of The Iron Horse, which was seen as the first real Ford picture, as in the youngest piece in his filmography that best represented what was yet to come from the filmmaker. This label strikes similar to Hitchcock's 1927 picture, The Lodger, which is acknowledged as the first true Hitchcockian experience. And I certainly agree with both these sentiments, finding some of the battle sequences in The Iron Horse to have more visceral effect through disorienting wide-shot montages than many epic scenes of violence in contemporary cinema. It is hard to beat the real thing compared to the dominant blue or green screens of today. In Ford's first half of his career, you had to shoot the damn thing, whatever that thing may be. A man ejected from his saddle, horses collapsing under the heat, structures turning to ash. You get the shot, print it, check the gate, take a puff from your pipe, and you move on. The day ain't getting any cooler. The directors of then were just built differently. They were tyrannical, and they had to be. People of that generation took little for granted, and if you had vision, you fought for it. John Ford and Sam Peckinpah were both pioneers for a new type of Western and cinema. They, in their own unique way, understood how to make their audiences marvel, salivate at their frames, experience dread, and intuit when to step away to leave the viewer in a state of catharsis. In Bloody Sam's case, the latter is especially true. We're going to break down Sam's career in a non-linear fashion, not unlike his boozing, to allow for deviations into different periods in film history that circle back to his overall style, much of which begins and ends in brutality. In this episode, I want to discuss Ford's 1956 Golden Baby, The Searchers, starring Johnny Wayne, Jeffrey Hunter, who is also known for his role as Jesus in Nicholas Ray's King of Kings, Ward Bond of Wagon Trail fame, Vera Miles, who is also known for her role as Lila Crane. So she's Marion Crane's sister, who is played by Janet Leigh in Hitch's Psycho, and a post-Rebel Without a Cause, Natalie Wood. And compare The Searchers to Peckinpah's 1974 film, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which is full of raw, unadulterated, nihilistic delusion, which can be identified as one of Sam's defining trademarks, which bled further and further into the pages of his scripts following The Wild Bunch, which released in 1969, and in many ways affirmed the nonlinear editing styles that permeated the French New Wave after the release of Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless in 1960. Midnight Cowboy with Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman, also released in 1969, used a deceptively rapturous cutting style to express the potent mixture of alarm and exhilaration Voight's Joe Buck feels in his new medieval New York City environment. The Wild Bunch features 2,721 cuts, averaging out to a shot length of roughly 3 seconds, and I believe the average amount of cuts in earlier studio pictures of the early 60s and preceding decades topped off at around 800 edits. But back to Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
This is Alfredo Garcia. He's about to become a very important man.
We are looking for an old buddy of ours, a compadre named Alfredo Garcia.
A private army is scouring 3 countries to find Alfredo Garcia.
Well, don't worry. If he's alive, I'll find him.
Alive isn't our problem.
Someone has offered $1 million for his head.
If I ever get my hands on him, I'm gonna kill him.
All we require from you is physical proof that Garcia is dead.
And we're prepared to settle for his head.
Bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia. This man will become an animal.
Alfredo's our saint. He's a saint of our money.
I want to take it to him.
I love you. This woman's dreams of love will be destroyed.
I've been here before. You don't know the way.
Innocent people will suffer.
With Alfredo's help, we can do anything, honey.
Holy ground will be desecrated.
You don't want me to be part of that, do you?
You are a part of it.
25 people will die.
Just being together is enough.
No, it's not, baby.
All because of Alfredo Garcia. And only one man really knows why.
Kill him.
Sam Peckinpah, director of the greatest adventure films of our time, has made possibly his most powerful and startling motion picture.
Benny, a piano-playing saloon rat in Mexico City, is approached by two professional hitmen who are searching for the titular character Al Garcia after a powerful Mexican landowner named El Jefe, which translates to the boss, who finds through breaking his teenage daughter's finger that Garcia is the father. El Jefe had plans of making Garcia his successor, feels betrayed, and self-righteously calls for Garcia's severed head.
Por favor. Un millón el que me traiga la cabeza de Alfredo Garcia. Bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia.
A desperate and mentally dilapidated Benny offers his services in finding Al in exchange for 10 grand. He asks for half of the reward money up front. They give him $200 and threaten his life if he doesn't turn up with the desired body part in 4 days' time. Now, before meeting with the hitman at the hotel, Benny went to meet with his girlfriend Alita, a maid and prostitute working for one of the worst hotels in Mexico City. Alita reveals to Benny that she slept with Garcia and that he died drinking and driving the previous week. This news makes Benny giddy, and he revels in the idea of simply digging up the body from the grave and opportunistically decides, without much critical thinking, to seek out the hitman who walked into his bar. Benny proposes to Alita to join him on his journey to the Garcia grave, claiming he only wants to confirm Garcia is in fact dead and buried, hiding his true motivations from her. They set off in Benny's busted-up red 62 Chevy Impala to the town where Alfredo is presumably buried. During a certain point, Benny takes his eyes off the road to meet Alita's lips. A bus hurtles towards them, slamming on the horn. Benny peels from the oncoming lane moments before a likely fatal collision. This brief moment is laughed off by the protagonists, foreshadowing an impending ruin to their relationship. After traveling for some hours, they pull off to the side of the road as dusk nears to eat something and get some rest. While Benny leans back, strumming his guitar in between slugs of cheap liquor, with Alita to his side stirring a pot of beans, two bikers spot their camp and bring senseless chaos to what would be a night of peace and joy for the uninhibited, wandering couple. While one of the bikers sits, holding Benny at gunpoint, the other drags Alita uphill behind a series of boulders and demands sex. Alita submits herself semi-willfully, fearing death for herself and Benny if she refuses. It is also worth noting the biker assaulting Alita sports peace and Taoist yin and yang patches on his jacket, which is a fitting statement from Sam on the decline of the counterculture at this point in the 70s when the film takes place. There are many comparisons one could draw from this scene between Alita and the biker to the Susan George rape scene in Straw Dogs. Both sequences have an undercurrent of sensuality emitting from the female victims that's just as confusing for the women in the film as it is for the viewer. Sam came under obvious fire for the construction of these scenes. They are some of the rougher scenes in 70s cinema in regard to violence, which is saying quite a lot. However, in Alfredo Garcia, Alita, after having her top torn off, doesn't react in the way you'd expect. She stands firm, locks eyes with her assailant, and the scene suddenly takes on an entirely unexpected attitude. The biker turns and begins sulking away from Alita, walks for 20 feet or so, then plops down against a boulder and ducks his head behind his shaggy, unwashed hair. Now, Alita begins approaching him and demonstrates control over the situation. She kneels down and they begin to make out, physically situated that would appear romantic to a random onlooker. Meanwhile, Benny thinks the biker is having his way with his girl, takes advantage of an opening, smashing a pan across his aggressor's face, grabs his now loose handgun and charges up the hill. Finding Alita and the biker cradling one another was not what Benny was expecting. He holds for a beat or so, terrified at what he's seeing, before popping 2 rounds into the biker's chest. The other biker, now lucid, announces his presence behind Benny, brandishing another pistol. Benny unloads on him, and the ragged, lifeless body collides with the grassy terrain in slow motion. The discombobulated couple speeds out of their camp towards the unknown. As they drive, Benny reveals his true objective of removing and delivering the head of Alfredo Garcia in exchange for the promised 10 grand. This adds an extra layer of devastation upon her night, as she wants nothing more than to ride off with Benny, minus the head, as she knows they don't truly need what it will hypothetically bring to live the life they mutually desire. Benny won't have it. The seeds for revenge have been planted. And there's so much that supports this character fault of his, and much of it you can gather just by looking at him. His dark shades always blocking out the light, and his clear aggravation for his low-status existence. It's also brilliantly communicated through Warren Oates' wholly original performance, and I've never seen anything like it. And neither has Alita, and their future compatibility comes quickly into question. Eventually, the following day, they make it to the grave and have a chance encounter with the Garcia family as they commemorate him. They wait till dusk and dig up the body. Alita, horrified, distances herself from Benny, and he removes his extra-large machete for decapitation. Slowly, she backs away, receding into the graveyard, a final and fateful mistake. A shovel flies out from the darkness, cracking Benny across the head before the deed is done, rendering him unconscious. The next morning, he awakens, dirt between his teeth, a body to his side. It's not Al's. Alita's deep red hair is dirtied, body still, and her soul departed. Amid tears, Benny clambers out of the grave. Al is still out there. It is this inherent need for revenge that connects the antagonists of Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia and the Searchers. In Ford's film, we see the same revenge character archetype of the Western genre stepping up to the plate under the Hays Code regime. The lead character, Ethan Edwards, a disturbed and imposing Confederate veteran who is just as defeated as he is hateful, motivated by chances for violent encounters, strides past volcanic monoliths, towering above the flat, wandering plains that make up Monument Valley, Utah. In the opening scene, Ford foreshadows Ethan's salvation in a silhouetted frame of Martha Edwards, Ethan's lost love and his brother's spouse, pulling the front door of her home wide open, revealing the great expanse. The camera holds for a beat after her preceding action, with her silhouette in the fore and the vistas in the back. Since we aren't privy to her reaction, the camera plays the role of her memory, gently nudging her forward, tracking her to the porch, where the indistinct figure of Ethan Edwards drifts from Martha's past to her present. It was not an arbitrary decision on Ford's part to present the opening 30 seconds through Martha's POV. Her presence is what draws Ethan out from oblivion, and her absence, made final after reuniting Debbie with her family, is what ultimately renders him a wanderer forever between the winds. Benny and Ethan are both men who first lose the woman they love to another man, then find them dead. This lost love that will never be realized is what spawns their hate through the passage of time. However, both characters have a chance of redemption that becomes an objective driving force that creates an intimacy between the audience and the character. We spend an hour with Benny as he has an ongoing dialogue with Al's severed head after reclaiming it from the men who tracked him and killed Alita. He makes it to El Jefe's compound, killing him and freeing his daughter and the newborn baby, something that he and Alita will never have. Jefe's daughter, Teresa, can now raise her child in a new world. For Ethan, it's a moment that had been in his mind for the 5 years leading up. Once he hoists Debbie up at the end of the third act, he stares into Martha's eyes and surrenders his hate.
No, Ethan! No!
Let's go home, Debbie.
If he hadn't seen Martha and Debbie, would he have spared her? It's a question to consider. The final shot of The Searchers truly represents Ethan's acknowledgement that love was and is the answer. And he does his duty by sparing Debbie and therefore preserving and allowing for the next generation to build a better West and America. So, the final arc to the Western revenge character archetype could be identified as a man who sacrifices his vengeance and his person so the young can flourish in a new and improved, more moral world. Thank you all for tuning in to this first episode of Celluloid Columbia. Next Monday, we will wrap up the breakdown and comparison of The Searchers and Alfredo Garcia and begin an analysis of earlier Peckinpah works.